I'm going to hand it over to James Lawless from ABA Oman to talk about skill transfer from 8 and unders to college admissions.
Thanks again, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Hi, Matt. Thanks a million for this, and seriously kudos for organizing. The structure, the ability for coaches to get together. It happens in every other element of competitive swimming around the world. It's fantastic to see such a large group of coaches making the step up and trying to collaborate a bit. So good job, man. Okay. I'm just going to share this with you guys. Can you see this screen now?
Yeah, we can see the whole window though, not as a presentation.
All right, okay, give me 1 second. Here we go. You can see it now, I assume.
No change on mine. There we go.
Okay, super. So guys, while this is loading up, I'll just give you a little bit of a background about me. I'm James Lawless. I'm a career swimming coach of 20 plus years, mainly at club swimming. Initially started was a fairly mediocre age group swimmer. Grew up, born and bred in Dublin in Ireland, and had gotten up to a level whereby I was kind of making the national championships, kind of touching on junior international competition. We've had a horrific, unfortunate shoulder injury, which ended the career, but started coaching immediately after that. So it's one of these things that has looked after me most of my life in terms of the direction that I took academically, and the direction I've taken around the world, to be honest. So most of my coaching background has been kind of dealing with very skills-oriented coaches and teachers. And I'm quite keen to ensure that wherever I go, that I'm taking that kind of philosophy and approach with me as well. So this presentation is about, and it was touched on the last presentation, just a different approach to competition planning. Okay, so in other words, it's addressing the relationship between what we do in practice and what we actually do at competition, to ensure that skills are being covered across the age groups along the long-term athletic development pathway. Okay. So the context of this is, how do we as a group of coaches or educators encourage skill development as a key component to long-term athletic development by matching competition outcomes to achieve the same? So in other words, we as a group of coaches will go in and we will teach skills in our practices. And then we are expecting those skills to be to a certain level through a whole method, and expect them to go out and race and to follow, I guess, to follow the instruction from and try to transfer it into a race situation. So while we're trying to build into this, is it more useful to think of another way to be able to reinforce those skills? So on the academic end of it, there are a series of studies that have been out over the last number of years. I wrote my PhD thesis about it, just in terms of how skill is transferred from coach to athlete, whether it happens organically and intrinsically. And this little quote here is quite useful just to put context on the whole presentation. Okay, so studies have distinguished between two processes to explain how skills can be transferred from one context to another: the implicit and the explicit processes. And I guess what we're trying to do here is to try and ensure that the coach or the teacher or the educator takes responsibility for being able to develop those skills all the way through. Okay, so we're talking about acquired skills, ones that are happening intentionally via instruction, and then the unintentional set of skills as well, which are things that happen by the environment that you're placed in. So those two types of skill transfer: your implicit skill transfer, it's non-intentional skill development. Athletes don't actively think about developing the skill, but acquires it by the environment they're placed in. And also the idea that we set the criteria and the athlete will aim to meet that goal. In other words, if we set up a particular skill requirement for an athlete and we set that as the benchmark we want them to achieve, then naturally, by that natural competitive nature, swimmers or athletes will try to achieve that particular level of skill. Okay. On the explicit end, it's related to a leadership figure. So this is your coaches, your meet organizers, your national governing body, that these people who are trying to set out the standard for swimmers to follow. Okay, so again, we are responsible for creating the environment and the structure conducive to reinforcing that skill-orientated program. So again, I promise this will be the last little quote for a while. Okay, but our environment plays a big role in association with that training. So if we have the right environment, okay, and the right culture behind that environment, it lends itself very, very well to long-term skill development. So this is the background to all of this. So I guess this presentation will be relatively short, and I'd be quite interested to get some of your opinions on this as well. But how can we re-engineer the weight of perception towards the importance of displaying skills at competition rather than being totally focused on a time-orientated outcome? Okay, so my biggest bugbear as a swimming coach is watching a 10-year-old arrive up to me in a $300 swimsuit, questioning, why they got a PB or how they got a PB, or swimmers coming back and giving me feedback saying, I got a PB, am I fantastic? And yes, you are. You've swam very, very well. But we all know that athletes are going to get bigger, taller. These things are going to happen all by themselves. And it's really important to be able to relate the reasons why those achievements happen, as opposed to just achieving the time by itself. So I guess throughout my coaching career, and if I'm on a poolside with a 10 or 12-year-old swimmer, I'll ask them to go in and give me something that happened during the swim. So in other words, did you count your kicks off the wall? You're swimming 100 breaststroke. How many kicks have you done each of the 25s? Where do you think that you can improve on those efficiency aspects? Or to come back to me with something that's meaningful, something that they did really, really well from a skill perspective, something that did not go so well, and how to bridge the gap between the two, and to actively be able to bring that back to training as well. So it's a far more useful tool as a coach to be able to get that kind of feedback from your athletes. And then in time, the athletes tend to come back and automatically give you that feedback. So it becomes less time orientated. Not that it's not important, but definitely during the developmental stages, it needs to be a little bit more about how you achieve rather than the achievement in itself. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken an idea of 4 different stages on the LTAD pathway. It's a far from perfect model, but it is a way to do this. Okay, so our fundamentals: females 5 to 8, males 6 to 9, learn to train, females 8 to 11, male 9 to 12, train to train, and train to compete or win. So these 2 elements at the very back end of it have been combined because the stages are quite similar in terms of what we expect from a skill development point of view. Okay. So what we're trying to do is to try and say that for swimmers who are age, say 9 and under, we set out the goals of what we should expect, similar to a Learn to Swim program. With this area being to standardize the skill set for kids arriving into the sport. Okay, so it's all about skills at our fundamental level, but time after time when we go out to swim meets, what we're doing is we're looking at a scoreboard. And I just question, is that necessarily the right way to go at this level? Skill development based on 25 and 50 meter repetitions. In other words, that there is a small example of a skill that's well executed. The competition skill focus should be somewhere around body control, streamlining, kick, rotation, undulation, tumbling, all those main fundamental movements in any sport of that age. Specific focus in developing 3 of the 4 strokes and an early introduction to swimming race butterfly, and the basics of starting and turning as well. So what I'm saying is, well, what we're trying to do at ABA, the background to this is that we are moving into a new facility. So we'll be a dual facility school, trying to create a different type of competition within the region. Skill-based swims kind of in Oman, it's not of a huge standard. So I guess my job within the school is to try to raise that overall standard. But it involves having to change the perception of what is success and what is not. So what we're trying to do is to give a little bit more weighting to the skills that are displayed at competition by making them all skills-based events. So in other words, On top of the time, there are additional points that are added for special events, such as, you know, a 25 kick or a 50 kick for time. You know, sculling or catch-based efforts. So in other words, you know, one of the events ends up being a 25 scull. Points allocated for streamlining to the flags, or any sort of measure of a skill-based achievement that we can add in at this point. So what I want to try and do is, as opposed to going for only a time-based effort, to rank swimmers based on their improvement in terms of their efficiency from one meet to the next. So similar to a seating time, when you arrive into the competition, you swim a 25 freestyle in, say, 22-second 25 freestyle. So what we would do is have it maybe as a SWOLF-based time or a swim golf-based time, so that you know, it would almost be like a football league table. Okay, so you're working up and down the ranks by your improvements in stroke efficiency, as opposed to just the time on its own. When we move on to the learn to train stage, key considerations for males age 12 under, females age 11 under. So the main aim here, as far as I'm concerned, is to increase the athlete's skill level at submaximal level, while developing and maintaining basic controls. Okay, so here it's increasing the distance that swimmers are expected to swim from 100 to 200 meter events. So for a lot of swimmers of this age, a 200 meter freestyle is not a maximal effort. Okay, so it's adjusting the distance that these athletes will swim at to be able to put more of an emphasis on the skills that they're displaying. The key concepts would include underwater work, your key controls, and introduction to pacing. Okay, so the evaluation here as a suggestion would be maybe the standard deviation on your 50-meter splits, so that it demonstrates consistent pacing, or additional points based on a method like this. Your kick counts off the wall, breathing patterns, and maybe score based on your last performance PB on a plus minus ranking. And that's by PB I mean you know, the skill-based evaluation, your kick counts, your standard deviation on your splits.
Hey, James, there's a couple questions that Andy has in the chat that I do think is relative to this point in the conversation. So he's wondering, does counting kicks off the wall matter, or does the feeling of the push-off matter more in your opinion? Is there an optimal number of kicks? And then the second part of that is, what age should they learn the 3 strokes and why?
Okay, so break it down piece by piece. I'm going to say, just give me one moment. I just want to pull back up this presentation. I think it's gone a little awry on me.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, so could you just repeat those questions again?
Yeah, so the first one is, does counting kicks off the wall matter, or does the feeling of the push-off matter more in your opinion?
At which level?
Andy, do you want to take this?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, any level. Yeah,
so in terms of developing underwater work, do kicks off the wall matter? I would argue yes, as a consistent development tool. So like we would try and encourage swimmers to clear the flags, whether it is by push off or adding in dolphin kick. And it's a key skill progression that we try to promote. So I think it's important at every level. Certainly up as far as a level where we are aiming for you know, sprint-based effort. Do you know what I mean? Where it's a time to 15 that might matter, or a time to 10. But do I think it's an important development tool to learn how to effectively kick off a wall? Absolutely. Do I think the feel of the push-off is important? Absolutely, and at all levels. The points that are being brought up here are a suggestion as to what types of skills would be useful to be able to evaluate at certain levels along the LTAD pathway. Thanks. Was there one more question, Matt?
Yeah, so in the learning to train, is having outcome goals for skills always a good thing? Does having an outcome focus removing the opportunity to learn how implicitly feel what they are doing?
Yeah, so I think as you move through the different LTAD stages, the focus on on the physical skills and feeling the skills would be less important, I would argue, and more geared towards how you plan your race. In other words, if I would say declare that I'm going to swim an X split on a 200 freestyle, I mean, how close am I coming to that? Am I achieving those race goals? Am I following a race plan? And do I know how to effectively hold a pace, descend a pace, ascend a pace, and those kind of considerations? So as I say, most of this is an example of how you could do it. But obviously it comes down to, as a program or as an organization, what we feel best promotes, the level of skill that's expected at that stage. Okay. So we move on to train, looking at females under 14, males under 15. And here it's looking to improve athlete trainability through a better understanding of engagement of the process. So this is where it's going, where it's moving a little bit more away from the physical skills and more towards your race planning concepts. Okay, would argue that focus on 200 meter to 1500 meter events as your key development piece would be quite useful. And again, the key concepts include underwater kick, key controls, and advanced pacing. So where I'm at with this is that in a lot of kind of club-based programs around the world, and when you swim at certain club meets, in order to be able to swim a sprint event at 12, 13, 14, 15, you must swim a 200 meter event in order to have the ability to swim the 50, because it encourages swimmers to become more well-rounded athletes and to develop a really, really good aerobic base before specializing in the shorter sprint events. And I'd argue that it's quite a good concept to follow. I certainly, from my point of view, when entering swimmers in competitions, I will do that. They must swim a distance swim before they'll be allowed to sprint, and it must. So in other words, a kid that wants to swim a 50 or 100 breaststroke must swim a 200 breaststroke to learn those key skills along the way as well. So in here, where race planning becomes a big issue, and it's probably an undervalued issue a lot of the time. Say that maybe the standard deviation issues on your 50, 100 meter splits on a 200 would be a useful measure to demonstrate that you have the ability to pace consistently. Perhaps ascending and descending in negative splits, to have that as a separate event. You know what I mean? Can you go out? Can you declare what you're going to do on the back end of your 200 meter swim? And if you happen to do it, then there's a reward or a points-based reward for this. Kick counting off the walls. Can you declare the number of kicks that you're going to do off each wall? Do you know what I mean? So in other words, can you maintain that level of underwater work throughout the whole swim? And again, score based on your last performance PBs on a ranking basis. Again, kicking becomes is really important at every stage along the development pathway. So would still argue that, is it useful to specifically have an event of a 200 or 400 kick for time? To be able to ensure that that's being developed, or it's a key focus point at this age group. And then use of a concept similar to USA Swimming IMX or IMO program, which encourages athletes to do a little bit more to become more well-rounded athletes, to swim a suite of events at competition and not be afraid to race a large number of events. Are there any questions on that, or I'll move on?
Yeah, sorry, I had one question. If 200, if you're saying 200 and 1500 events are key for development, but we're looking at skills at this age group, would you say that these events are where the skills start to break down, and actually the short events would be better for the younger kids, because this is where they actually get to maintain skills under pressure at fast speeds, as opposed to longer events where the skills start to break down?
Yeah, again, it depends on the stroke of the event. So here we're talking about males under 15 years of age. So like in terms of skill development, like we know that we've mastered a skill when we can do three things. We can do it slowly without pressure. We can do it fast under pressure, and we can do it when we're fast and tired. So to be able to master a skill, those three things need to happen. So in other words, your race effort looks as well or as close to your recovery paced application of that skill. So in order to be able to demonstrate that I have fully mastered this skill, it must be completed at pace and at distance also. So at 15 under, I think it's probably a good age to begin to do that and to evaluate the skills based on those concepts.
I have a question, James, if you're okay.
Sure.
So, I like the fact that I like the subjectivity of it and the kids becoming aware of how they're swimming, particularly at the younger end. Do you get them to self-assess and then report to you, or are you do you turn it into a kind of quasi diving, come swimming, scoring versus time, or how do you get them to notice improvements?
Yeah, so in practice, there's a section in practice that focuses on this stuff all the time. In other words, every week we will always have a kick for time at every level on the program. What we would do is when they're organized weekend meets, or as in-house meets, we will have timekeepers and stroke judges who will do this for us. So it is a recorded it's a recorded effort. So instead of putting a stopwatch in a timekeeper's hand, they will have a checkboard with whatever we're trying to achieve during that meet, and they will evaluate. And yeah, look, it takes a little bit of time in order to be able to compile all the results and that kind of thing. But within a closed meet, we're able to do it over the course of the week, and it works quite well.
Have you come up with a formula packed Google sheet or an Excel sheet or anything?
Yeah, I have. I do have a lot of resources with this. So what I'll do is I'll sling them onto Matt, and he can send them out.
I think that'd be really useful. I mean, just for kids to, even if they're putting in their own details and things, and it's just nice that they're able to.
But it's just, I mean, from our point of view, it's really great to be able to see. So when you've got a number of 12-year-old kids, and we know that there's going to be different sizes of particularly male 12-year-old kids. It's where they really, really start to grow. And what you'll tend to happen is you'll have these kids will all of a sudden turn into these man children, you know what I mean, who are swimming at 50 and will blast everybody out of the water. Even though you've got more skillful kids who will not get that opportunity, but may do in 4 or 5 years down the line. So the idea is to try and level the playing field with everybody, so that everybody feels like that they can achieve in the sport, you know. So for some events on a 12-year-old 50 freestyle, you've got big kids win races. We're going to have this, but it also provides opportunity for those who are not as big, who are not as strong, but who are skillful, that can still achieve at their level as well. And I'm a big believer in that, because you know any of the international athletes that I've coached that has reached success have been not kids who have been super fast from the age of 8 and on. It's something that has gradually happened over the years. So you know, there's always a diamond in the rough. If that
James, sorry, mate.
Go on.
Could you just explain what do you think gave these kids who develop late? What do you think gave them that ability to come through and reach international success? Like, why do you think it happened?
Why? It's just consistent application of the right skills at the right time. So, in other words, like I just give an example. I had an 8-year-old kid who would have weighed to the tune of about 60 kilos at 8 years of age. Very, very large kid, and this was the only form of exercise that he could do was being in the pool. You know, had consistently, you know, lost some weight over a number of years, but was one of these kids that always turned up to practice, had always done what he was asked to do, had always contributed to the program. And what happened was he just leaned out at 12 or 13 years of age, but had been consistently involved in that self-improvement piece, following a program similar to this, and then had just started to develop. So in other words, as his size developed when he grew older, the skills went with it, and that's more or less how that one happened, you know. But you could immediately write off a kid at 8 or 9 or whatever based on a body shape or based on the speed they happen to swim at, a certain repetition at that age, and not progress them through that pathway. Or you have the option of being able to evaluate in a slightly different way, to give these guys a measure by which they know that they're improving, and particularly useful as well for young girls who plateau as well. I mean, how much, like, I know that we've all had young teenage girls that have left programs because they've just flatlined, for a couple of years, and then say, well, why am I involved in this sport? What am I doing here? I'm not getting any faster. My friends are getting faster. I'm not going anywhere with this. I would rather do something else, and it typically tends to be because we reinforce the time-based outcomes for these kids who are not at a level where they're seriously competing. And I guess it's just to give another option, do you know what I mean? To be able to demonstrate that, yes, I'm improving, and in the right kind of way, because we know if we're developing those skills through the pathway, that we're going to have faster swimmers at the far end of it. But it's one of these things that, there is a demand for success in terms of swimmers swimming fast all the time at every meet, no matter what program that you walk into. So it's quite difficult to push this thing over the line unless it's structurally organized. In other words, the meet itself, this is what we're aiming to do, so the focus of the meet is going to display the skills as opposed to going in and hammering out some times, and it just makes it a much easier sell, not for every meet and not all of the time, but that it allows some of these swimmers to come through and show off what they've learned. And then it makes it easier to have those conversations later on when it becomes a time-based focus, because they have been routined in speaking about what kind of skills that they're looking to show off, how they've planned their race, and they're more engaged in that process. Is it okay, Andrew? Okay. All right. So the train to compete or train to win end. So both these stages they're linked, as I said before, due to their similarity in focus. Okay. So the main aim is to increase the athlete trainability through a better understanding of engagement of the process. So it's really mastering the link between training adaptations and outcomes of competition. So from here, when you start moving towards a college-based admission, you're really looking at a whole package here. So are you a team player? What other sports at school did you play? Have you captained the team? Have you, there's more than just physically being in the water. There's the soft side to it also. Okay. I'm a big fan of running ISL style team events at school level. I think it's a good way for swimmers to get in and race. Again, not always for time, but just for placing and to work on those really, really good race skills. So focusing on kind of a collegiate style yard swimming meet, that kind of concept. Within that, to swim a 200-meter event in order to swim a 50 of the same event, so that you've got that sprinter versus kind of middle distance athlete mix. IMR and IMX style overall points ranking, as opposed to high-tech top athlete points rankings. And then additional points allocated for pacing, for hitting that PB, for the number of events that you swim over the course of the day, different events. So, I mean, I'm sure that we've all had conversations with swimmers about only wanting to swim X events on a day, or I'm going to be too tired on day one, can't swim 4 events in a session because I want to, all of those kind of conversations. They're just trying to get away from. Because when you start going towards these big college meets and international events, you are expected to swim multiple times over the course of the day. And qualifiers for these events, you are required to swim multiple swims over the course of the day. So it's just really important that this is kind of declared from the beginning that this is an expectation. And then finally, a bonus for nailing a nominated split. So whatever that prize might be. So in other words, I'm going to hit whatever time it is on split 3 of a 200 back. And if you achieve it, you have a points-based outcome, or you have a prize of some description, to encourage people to find a pace or to be able to focus on a certain area of the swim. All right, that's it for me. And again, I know that there's going to be a lot of people in the room that will have like a set of opinions on what is the most important skill to work at a different end of the development pathway. Fully understand that. There's a lot of opinions about it. I guess the whole idea behind this is to A, have the conversation, and B, to try and try and have that discussion as to, is there an alternative way that we can develop skills at a structural level? So In other words, that it's not always the coach demanding something happens. It's something that the swimmer will aim to achieve, because that is how the competition is set up. And it would just be nice to see just, a few more 10 and 12-year-olds coming in with their $20 suits or whatever, and focusing on the skills rather than the the latest arena model.
Will you be implementing like a reverse FINA costume rule? It's a Tesco. You got to come in a Tesco swimming suit.
Absolutely, plastic works for me.
Yeah, exactly. Saves you a lot of time before meets with kids kind of stressing and having to cut 100%. Their nails and everything else, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Well, this is something. There will be a circuit of this organized. We're currently building a new facility in AVA Oman, and looking to introduce some of these as standard competitions within the region as well. So this is definitely something that we're looking to spread, to be able to promote, and to generally just start improving some skills within the region.
James, how have you found traction in kind of that education side of the suits? I know when I was in Cairo, that was a battle that I fought, that we wanted to save those until our conference meet, and the parents pushed back, especially when we would swim against club teams that would all show up in those. And yeah, how have you had success with that education piece of it?
Well, what he did was he get swimmers in suits and get them to swim 50 freestyle in practice, and then get them to change out of the suit and swim the same 50-meter swim in practice, and say, what's the difference? Have the parents watch it. It's quite simple. So the difference that it's going to make is marginal. And typically with a longer swim, it's going to be a little bit more.
I did that on my end. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. No problem. So it's being able to demonstrate to parents in a controlled fashion, what is the benefit of having this? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of the same. It's the kind of same with anything. Like there's no point in kind of having the latest Ferrari if you can't drive a car. That's how I see it.
Technique certainly goes along. Technique certainly goes a lot further than a tech suit, right? I mean, again, it's like me picking up a pair of Tiger Woods golf clubs. I'm not going to get the same score just because I'm wearing the same swimsuit and the same clubs. I mean, it's yeah.
Correct, but look, it's about, like, the whole context of this is to be able to reinforce the value of the skills that you're practicing in training. Do you know what I mean? In other words, that there's a direct relationship between the type of work that you're doing in practice and applying it as think of it like a martial arts system. So in other words, like for a competitive karate, so yes, you're going to have sparring, you're going to have combat style competitions, but you're also going to have a the kata element of this, where it's based on movement, and it's based on your ability to achieve kind of a fluid skill level. It's a bit like gymnastics. The floor work is not evaluated on how fast you can do a flip. It's based on your execution of the skill. So there I know they're in another sports, and it's quite different, but it's just a different perception as to what you believe is important when you're trying to teach a skill. And yes, that I'm not a coach that's going to say that times are not important. Of course they are. But what I'm saying is that some of the time, can we create that relationship between what we're doing in practice and what we do to demonstrate that skill by having some events within a competitive program or a competition program that actually focus on the skills you should be working on in practice. I mean, maybe it's a question for everybody, but I'm just curious to know, say, kids between, say, 12 and 14 years of age, how much kicking a week are we doing? I mean, do we see it as an important part of the stroke development? Is it, what kind of, quality kicking work are we doing in terms of, volume, number of hours a week, this kind of thing? Does anybody want to give some detail?
Yeah, sorry, do you mind, I'll just maybe add on to that question. Does it matter how much kick you're doing? And I asked that question in the context of, does it matter how much kick volume you're doing? If it doesn't, the important thing is that it synchronizes with the whole stroke.
Okay. So say for example, if you've got a breaststroke where we're talking about anywhere up to 90% of the propulsion that comes from the stroke is from the leg action. So I would argue that yeah, it's rather important. I mean, usually if I'm coaching swimmers, I'll try to base the stroke for the most part around the kick. But then again, you're going to have stroke styles are going to branch out as you progress through the program. So in other words, you're going to have kids who feel a little bit better about doing a 2 or 4 beat kick swimming distance events on a galloping style stroke. You're going to have, you know, swimmers who will be very, very kick heavy. You'll have a whole pile of different styles of swimming. But I think as a general rule, it's probably a good start to make to plan the strokes around the kick, in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think our practices, from a purely numbers perspective, is probably about 10% pure kicking. Some days a little bit higher, some days a little bit lower. I really also like to use kick as a way to get heart rates up and get the legs tired before going straight into some fairly high quality, fast swimming as a result. When I had a lot more water time than our current team does, I would do that at least once a week, a series of split hundreds where it's 50 kick, 50 fairly high. And I was really happy with the way that our athletes were finishing races when doing that as a regular part of practice.
Hi, Matt. Could I just ask, and sorry, these don't mean to be like a confrontational style of questioning. I'm trying to unpick things.
Sure.
Why would you do one session of kick per week? Why not 2 or 3 or none?
Sorry, that it was not a full session. Like once a week, we would do a set of. The go-to was 10 hundreds at the beginning of the year and then building it up, but trying to build that into at least one session a week, that particular set. In my younger days, I was probably closer to 25-30% kick. As I've gotten a little bit older, I have backed that down. I think that, you know, the USRPT side is that you just should be sprinting. And if I had to classify the way that I coach, it's probably a little bit more like that. And so not those standalone, but I still do find it pretty valuable to bring it in, especially as a teaching mechanism. And as James is talking about, an awareness mechanism, like isolating the kick, especially more for me than drills in terms of what the arms are doing. I do find that's necessary in terms of teaching and having the swimmers to be aware of what they are doing.
James, I've got a question, much controversial as it is. Just your view on it. The kick does not necessarily contribute to propulsion in 3 of the strokes. This is an old article written in SwimSwam. What's your take on it?
Look, we're going to have different opinions on what constitutes really, really great technique. But if you look at any 1500 meter swimmer around the world at world level right now, there are very few that do not have a monster kick behind that stroke. So there'll be a reason why there's a commonality in all of this, and it's gone to a stage where swimmers are no longer focusing on kick for the sprint events. But look at Katie Ledecky, look at these athletes that have the ability to be able to throw out these monster kick-based efforts on these swims and sustain it for 800 to 1500 meters. You know, there's a very good reason why that happens, I would argue. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single swimmer must have a very, very big kick in order to swim fast. It's not what it means. But the overwhelming majority of swimmers would benefit from having strong kick-based stroke, and particularly as they're developing. As those stroke styles change later on, you know, it's very difficult to develop a kick later on. In other words, So if you decided later on that you require that kick and you haven't been developing it for a number of years, well, you can't go back and forth to it, you know. Whereas you can very much remove the kick or adjust the kick later on, but you already have that background and that ability to be able to make that choice at the right time. That's my take on it.
Hi, everyone. I will also add something in regards of that I've been realizing like through the years, as you will say about the strong kicking. I believe that when the swimmer is able to understand and to feel that the kicking is even pulling and pushing, there is a lot of propulsion there that you can tell the difference. I also agree in why don't you split the kicking sessions. That is really up to what you have planned. And also I believe that kicking also is a really good way to train technique in different paces. So even you are not holding a kickboard, you are training, let's say, coordination or other kind of technique with different paces of counting strokes or whatever, that you can add kicking as a way to keep improving it, not isolated, but is still part of it. Yeah, I wanted to share that with you.
I totally agree with you as well. So like sometimes when we would do kind of kick progression sets, for example, which would require you to kick at different paces over the course of 100, or to integrate that into like a skills-based approach to be able to descend swim. So in other words, if you did 4 100s descending off, I don't know, say 2 minutes, we're aiming to start at maybe PB plus 20 or PB plus 25, and to use the skill adaptations, or to add in those little pieces of skill on each consecutive swim in order to bring down the time. Do you know what I mean? So say, you know, one is just looking long and smooth. The second 100, we're building in the kick into it, which is going to give you it should give you a natural descending effect. Third, then we're adding a little bit more lean onto the stroke, maybe just a little bit more power, holding stroke rate the same. And then maybe on the last 100, then you're throwing the whole lot together. You're adding rate, you're adding kick, you're adding power. So that's how we would kind of integrate the kick or the paddle work or the pull work or that kind of thing into sets from a practical point of view. And to be able to show the benefit of each of those components. Has anybody else got any questions, guys?
Well, James, thank you so much.